Welcome to How to Be a Better DM. My name's Tanner Wayland, and me and my friends today, we're going to be talking about how to build your world and how to basically take the inspiration that you have for like building out a campaign or a world and actually putting it into action. And today I've got a bunch of guests with me. Of course, I have Caden. Say hi.
Hey, hey, hey.
I've got Justin.
Hello.
And I've got Jake.
Hey, hey, hey.
Now, Jake Packham, you'll recognize him if you listen to our other show, Pact Boon. He's the DM for that entire world, that campaign. And we just, we haven't taken a chance to really, delve into your mind, find out what makes it tick, if we even want to know.
Few have made that attempt. Usually I got to pay for it afterwards.
You're like, man, we're having a really good conversation. They're like, yeah, I can bill you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
$70.
Yeah, that'll be $100. Thank you so much for your time. Therapy's great, guys.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So in this campaign that we're doing for Pact Boon, we're in the world of Calignos, right?
Yeah.
What were like some major inspirations for that world?
Sure. A lot of it comes down to what I love in a D&D game is conflict. And I wanted a world that was rife with it. How can I make as much conflict as possible while still being ordered and have structure to it? So I wanted nearly every aspect from the pantheon of the gods to the layout of the different continents and islands to how the governments were structured, everything to be in conflict and turmoil with something else. The weather is in conflict with each other. The gods are in conflict. Half of the world is inaccessible unless you have magical or arcane means. And so it poses a lot of really easy plot hooks for me because I just say, what conflict do we want now? Do we want to fight gods? Do we want to fight the world? Do we want to fight another person? It's all ready for me.
And speaking of therapy, why are you drawn towards conflict so much? like what's up with that?
What happened to you? Yeah, before I dig into that, are you covered by my insurance?
So not yet.
Not yet. Well, are you a cop?
Yeah.
Are you a cop?
What?
Legally, you have to tell me.
Yeah, he's asking you straight up. So.
Oh no, I they wouldn't let me join at all.
Okay, great.
What have you done? Goodness.
This is how to be a better DM after dark.
After dark.
I'm slowly realizing that I don't fit in with these guys. I can't keep up.
You have no idea.
That's nonsense. But I completely forgot your question, my man.
No, that's fine.
Distracted by the bit.
Honestly, I do like that though, because I guess in our lives we try and avoid conflict, but most of the time when we actually make progress either in our career or like in our personal lives, it's because we invite more elements that can go wrong,
Sure.
or that at least take a lot more effort. And so I like this idea of creating a world where there's just conflict everywhere, so that wherever the players are interested, you can be like, oh yeah, there's definitely something you can deal with over there, right?
And I think part of that is like conflict to me has a resolution somewhere, and it's up to creative players to find how they want to resolve that conflict. I think that's one of the things that I love about good books. Good books have a good conflict or a struggle. Every good show or movie has a struggle that is conflict of some kind, whether it's actual combat or intellectual, political intrigue, whatever it is. Like there is some sort of conflict that gets resolved that makes us feel good and want to come back and do it for season 2.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Here's a question for the table then. How much responsibility lies on the dungeon master versus the players for conflict resolution?
That's a great question. I think there should always be an option for it. And I think that falls on the dungeon master to have a prepared out, so to speak, that not every combat encounter needs to lead to actual bloodshed. I think that perpetuates that murder hobo mentality, that if there is a way to avoid conflict, that can be discovered or talked about above table. But I think it's player to player, right? Not every player plays Dungeons and Dragons for the combat. Not me, but somebody does, you know?
Probably the therapist that you go see, like they don't want it.
Absolutely.
They probably don't play D&D.
They don't want the smoke.
You'd be
That's
surprised. Actually, a lot of therapists use games to anyways, that's a whole nother topic.
My old therapist, when I told him that I get together weekly for Dungeons and Dragons, he was like, "Well, Caden, I thought we fixed you."
So then we need to go to twice a week.
Yeah.
Is what I'm hearing.
So I like the question, though, because I feel like sometimes as players, you know, when you get in those spaces where the DM has presented a challenge and then you spend like basically an hour just planning it out. I feel like that happens when players are like, I don't know if we can solve this, or if we can, it's just going to automatically cost us much more than we want to pay, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when that happens, it's important for DMs to kind of set the stage in their previous games, and also when they present a new problem, saying, hey, I'm not trying to get you guys to just give up on this. Or you can say, like, hey, this isn't solvable at your level. Don't spend too much time thinking about it. But if you do want them to deal with it, say, like, hey, I just am interested in what you guys are wanting to try with this. You don't need to have everything perfect, but I do want to know what you have planned. And we'll do some rolls and, kind of set the table for them to know that, hey, this isn't an impossible problem. You don't need to spend forever. Spend some time, but not forever or anything, right?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of feels a little bit tangential, but I think it offers opportunity to use the tools already built into the gaming system in a unique way, right? Every character has a background trait that has some sort of history that usually involves some way of thinking that is most often atypical to how Caden Otley actually thinks, right? Mm-hmm. You're not a pirate, right? But you have a sailor's background in Pact Boon, right? So you don't know how to, tie a rigging and things like that, but it offers a way for a dungeon master to say, hey, you don't think like this, but I'm going to offer a way for your character to think about this differently because of your background, and offer ways to either create on the fly new backstory or utilize already written backstory to help formulate new perspectives.
That's so cool. I wish my brain worked like that.
So I really like what you said there, and I'm actually going to tie it a little bit to what Tanner said. He mentioned a phrase. He said, set the table. And I think the way he said it wasn't the way I perceived it. So I used to be in a sales role at my job. I was a BDR, so, calling people all day. And my sales manager, there was a process. He said, step one is to set the table. And the way he meant that was you essentially put out all of the necessary things for the conversation to go well. And I think in D&D, that's a very interesting concept. One, because it says table, and this is a tabletop game, so kind of a play on words. But two, as a dungeon master, I think sometimes you do have to essentially set the table so that your guests, your players, can come, sit down, and have this wonderful meal. And I'm curious, in Calignos, and maybe you can't say this because of spoilers or whatnot, and us being the players, obviously, that goes maybe even a little bit farther, but how have you tried setting the table so that way when we come, we sort of kind of step into these interesting situations that tie into our backstories, like you said?
Yeah, I think appetizers, man. Right? Like, just like any good 3-course meal, like, you got to start the meal with the palate ready for it. And so sprinkling little ideas and concepts of like the Pact Boon, right? Like, what is this lethargy? Like, how can we discover something about something that is honestly at this point not understood at all? But then you also again have these backstories where each of you have some extra motives to do something else that might be counter to the main storyline, and those can serve as little means of wetting the palate to get ready to really chomp into the main storyline. So I think a lot of it is building, right, having conflict anywhere and everywhere, and having set planned appetizers to plug and play little ideas that your players can take and run. And if you like your ideas, all of them will be enjoyable, right? All of your ideas will be worth pursuing to some extent. So let them run, man.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that that if you present the options in, like, just give them little tidbits, you're going to see what the players are interested in, and then kind of guide them along that way. Like, I like in the campaign how, we arrived on the shore, and there was the Sheriff Don greeted us. A whole bunch of stuff happened. We got indentured, through debt and everything. I like that there's a couple ways you could do it. You could just leave players so they're like, oh man, what do we do? Like, kind of to throw themselves against this, this big old obstacle of Sheriff Don. But you knew that, like, hey, they're not ready for that yet. And so you were like, oh, immediately give them another objective, right?
Yeah.
And if we didn't like that objective enough, we would have still tried to kill Sheriff Don right then. And
Absolutely.
then some
We'd
of us
have
would
new
died.
characters.
Yes, exactly.
3 of them.
Yes. and that's the great thing.
Cyril would have survived.
Cyril would have lived to
I'm pretty sure
fight another
Cyril
day.
would have gotten eaten, because remember, Sheriff Don was like, I'm going to eat that guy.
Empty threat.
He did threaten to eat Cyril.
I don't know why.
I don't either, man.
It doesn't look appetizing.
Guys, crunchy. A lot of his cultures eat insects.
Actually, yeah. Isn't there like an ant that if you eat, it literally tastes like a Fruit Loop or something?
I'll tell you what, I ate caterpillars in Africa, talking about this, and they tasted like steak. They would just dry them out in rocks. They were these big fat caterpillars.
Absolutely not. In no world.
Yeah.
I mean, if they taste like steak, I'd try it.
I came home with a foodborne illness, but I think that was
Is
from
there
something
MSG
else.
Couldn't possibly
in
be
them?
the bugs.
No, not the bugs.
No. But speaking of bugs, just kidding. I don't have a transition there. But anyway, guys, for the last thoughts here, let's just we've talked a little bit about conflict and getting players to either resolve that or engage with that. If we could just go down the line, starting with Jake, just share your last thoughts on that topic and how DMs can approach conflict in world building from a better angle.
Yeah. That's the whole point, right? We play this game because it's fun to feel cinematic. It's fun to feel fantastical. And if there is no conflict, it just falls flat. So let the highs be highs, let the lows be lows, and build opportunities for your characters to look freaking cool. Let them be cool, and it'll be a dang good time.
As far as I go, I think what I would suggest is set the table. And you can carry that analogy pretty darn far, right? If you're going to throw a dinner and you want it to be buffet style, or you want to serve your guests, right, you think of the considerations necessary to make the meal enjoyable. So same thing with D&D. If you're going to have a very direct and story-driven campaign where the party needs to do certain things, you still need to make it enjoyable. If you're going to make it buffet style, you don't want all of the food just on one plate, right? You want to separate things and make it clear the choices that they have. So make sure to set the table.
I think for me, it's probably just encouraging your players to do more collaborative storytelling and allowing them to actually, voice thoughts that they have in cool ways that the story could go. Like a lot of the time when players say things at my table like, oh, and then this happens and this happens, I'm like, oh, for sure that happens, and this is what it looks like, and because it adds to that whole dynamic so much more. So that's probably my advice.
Yeah, and I think if you're ever finding yourself cautious about adding conflict into the story, just realize that it might be because you aren't communicating well enough to your players that, like, hey, I'm presenting this conflict, but it's there to be resolved, and I'm on your side to help resolve it. If you communicate that well, then they aren't going to approach it from a, like, hey, we have to do this perfect, and they'll dive in and they'll have a much better time. So I hope that you guys go out there when you're creating your next campaign, or you're changing your current one. Create conflicts, work with your players to resolve them, and until next time, let's roll initiative.
Thanks again for listening to our show. If you like our content and would like to engage with more of it, head over to our Instagram account, @HowToBeABetterDM, and give us a follow. Make sure to watch some of our Dungeon Master rules videos while you're there to give yourself some more structure and procedure as a Dungeon Master. Also, don't forget to reach out with a DM and we can talk shop and I can get to know you a little bit better. Thanks again for listening.